Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. As I am recording this a little bit earlier than normal, it is currently Friday, and we are still waiting out the election results, which is normal. We're all trying something different this year, with COVID-19 happening and all of these states that don't normally do as many mail-in votes are having to figure that out on their own. So, hopefully, we'll have a president by the time this airs on Monday. I mean, technically, there's still the sitting president until Inauguration Day. But it's the not knowing that drives you crazy. So hopefully by the time you're listening to this on Monday, we will have a president. As of right now, we're going to talk about The Boys Season 2, Episode 7. Interestingly enough, there are a lot of heavy political themes in this episode. She said, surprising no one, because that's what this show is about. So I did get to watch episodes 7 and 8 this past week. I pretty much binged them right after I finished the last podcast episode on number 6 for you guys. So, we're going to pick up with 7, and I am stoked to talk to you guys about these mirror concepts of keep America safe again, how people use political rhetoric and different phrasing to help influence people's decisions, and the way that people frame the world around them. And we're also going to talk about having a loss of meaning, searching for meaning in one's life, and what you do when you feel that you've lost it. Stick around to the end, and we will talk about where we find Lamplighter as well in this brand new world where he's kind of working with the good guys. But up first, let's start with that Alex Jones style commentary at the beginning of the show. There is essentially a montage at the beginning of this episode that I thought was masterfully done. And it shows a man who lives in his mom's basement, this white dude with a beard, is living in his mom's basement, and he's listening to Alex Jones style commentaries every day. Instead of music in this montage, it's just what sounds like Alex Jones, and then also Fox News in the background. And you can hear this inundation of propaganda news, and also the gradual language shifts that Stormfront in particular starts taking. We knew that they were intentionally trying to change the language and mold it around their agenda earlier in the season, when they were talking about the difference between supervillain and super terrorist, and having these groups come in and meet about it, these marketing and advertising focus groups. That's the word that I was looking for, focus groups. I've even been a part of some of those when I was in college, but they essentially get a random group of people together, or people who match their target demographics, and ask them open-ended questions about how the language use or the product or the packaging makes somebody feel. And then they base their target for their language or their product and take it from there. They just do that accordingly. So we saw from that they were changing the language slightly, making sure that they paid attention to terms like super terrorist or super villain. And it reminds me of Hillary Clinton's use of the term super predators when she was the first lady back in 1996 and was referencing the 1994 crime bill. So the type of language that we use really does matter. So I know in the media a lot people argue back and forth about the importance of labels and what we call different things. And that can be anything from identity and using pronouns that people prefer to going through and choosing words for marketing, like super predator. But in this case, it's also a political tool. It's not just something that shampoo companies might do to make sure they're developing a new product that people will like. People also do this for the type of language you use. When I was in college, I took linguistic anthropology, and one of our assignments was to analyze the type of language that was used for any product of our choosing. And it was very illuminating as I watched the other students present their topics on their absolutely random interests, because he said we could do it about anything, so long as it had a linguistic anthropology and product naming approach. And it was wild that across all of these different products and varied interests, that they still had that intentional type of marketing going on. We've mostly seen it in the boys in the form of having these PR groups. There's been a big focus on things like acknowledge, apologize, action. But this is also a really important theme that they've been underweaving through here. And this montage really brings everything together of what they were saying. There's a scene in this one and in number 8 that really bring that home. So they start using language like make America safe again. And they're not even being very thinly veiled with these metaphors. They're being super transparent about it at this point, even more so in your face than the boys usually is. And this montage mostly consists of Stormfront and Homelander speaking to the people, but primarily Stormfront. And they're going around and doing these shows together, essentially, these public appearances, as a couple representing patriotic Americans and saying things like keep America safe again and letting folks know that anyone who comes over here who is foreign could be a super terrorist, that all of these super terrorists are not created here on American soil. No, those are superheroes. Supervillains come from elsewhere. And so that's making people think of foreigners as being super terrorists. It's causing them to have a bad association with it. Just like when a lot of folks use the term refugee now in almost a derogatory way. And that's very similar to the agenda that they seem to be going for here in The Boys. Indeed, it is art imitating life. So we're talking about people saying things like make America safe again versus make America great again, and conflating foreigners with threats, whether that be as villains and predators or as being here to take your jobs or get things that you don't have access to. It's the same principles, and that's why that kind of ideology can be dangerous. It radicalizes people and works them up, and that's what we see happen with this guy living at home with his mom, where he starts getting paranoid about people who don't look like him, up to the point that he shoots a convenience store clerk who's a man of color because he thinks of him as being a foreigner and therefore a threat. And in this instance, they're thinking of him as being a super terrorist or a super villain. But it's no different than when people in the US would think that people from overseas who were of Middle Eastern descent were terrorists just because they were here, or when we were at war with Japan in World War II and we put people into concentration camps because they were Japanese and we were afraid they were spies. This is American history. America has never been safe for everyone, just as it's never been great for everyone. We also see Lamplighter interviewing with the equivalent of AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in Mallory's home, while the boys are getting cleaned up, because pretty much once again, they are, covered in gore and ick. Like, not everyone, but Huey in particular, he's a little squishy in regards to their whole party. Huey needs to put more points into, he needs more armor. Huey needs something to help him be less squishy. I don't know how he can get more hit points. Maybe he just has to toughen up. I don't know. Maybe he'll be like Daniel Jackson from Stargate SG-1, and he'll start out all geeky, and then just get really buff by the end. Probably not, and I'm okay with that too. But poor Huey, I feel bad for him. He has the lowest HP of literally anyone on their team. He's our Agent Mulder. He's on a quest, but he just steadily gets his butt kicked. I picked Mulder instead of Captain Kirk for that because, really, Captain Kirk is also kind of a sex symbol in some ways, and Huey is just kind of awkward and super sweet, though, and his heart is pretty much in the right place. And in that way, I think that he is a lot like Mulder. He's closer to Mulder than he really is to Captain Kirk. Although Captain Kirk is generally the obvious go-to when you're a hero who gets your butt handed to you a lot. But really the most surprising part of this is that we see Lamplighter in Grace Mallory's house. And Lamplighter has been a big unseen evil for a lot of the show up until now. And now that we do see him in the same room as Mallory, it is a little bit jarring. But for Mallory, Lamplighter being willing to testify for Congress is a fair trade-off for allowing him to live, despite what he's done specifically to her. So for Mallory, she's still keeping the big picture agenda in mind. She's the one who brought everyone together to try to take down Vought. Not just the Seven, but Vought itself, and figure out what they're up to. So she's standing by that right now, and even though she is probably seething and struggling not to kill him right now, it turns out that Frenchie made a good argument for her, and she's willing to let him live to testify. So that tells us a lot about Mallory's restraint as a person, and also her ability to put aside her own feelings when it comes to thinking about other people and the greater good, and the greater justice as well. We also see Annie meeting her mom in a coffee shop to hash things out. In episode 6, we saw that Stormfront was kind of pushing for her mom to hash things out with Annie. And we don't specifically know entirely why. We just know that Stormfront was really messing with her. But Annie's mom hits her up, and we see her meet her in this coffee shop to start hashing it out. And it reveals that Annie's really so mad at her mom because Annie's faith was so closely tied to her superpowers. And that's because her mom taught her that her powers were bestowed upon her by God. She thought that she was blessed. So this is not just finding out her mom has lied to her. It's a crisis of faith in everything she's ever been, everything she's ever believed. And on top of that, her experience with Vought has been super negative. And she says, what we do means nothing. It's all for money. And so she's crushed spiritually, just all around. She's realized that everything she's ever believed in her life, everything she's ever worked for, has all been a lie, or at best, a facade. And so her mom says, honey, you're so upset. Just come away with me for a while. I already cleared it with Vought. And unfortunately, she really has already cleared it with Ashley. And right at that point, Black Noir finds them, despite the fact that Starlight removed her tracker in the last episode. I don't remember if I mentioned that part or not, but that was like a really gory scene. That was also a lot of fun, because, Annie can heal back really quickly, but Frenchie was also disturbed by the tool he had to use to get through her body. And I think it was like some kind of Dremel or something, like a diamond tip Dremel tool that he was using to try to slice open her body because, they're pretty much bulletproof. So this was very difficult for him to get all the way into her body to get it out. So there was a lot of waiting and nothing happening, and then all of a sudden he's like splashed through into her neck and shoulder area. But they managed to pull out that tracker. But unfortunately, since her mom told her that she's already talked to Vought and cleared it with them for her to come away with them, Black Noir has found them. Her mom led them straight to her. So that's a problem, and it ends up in being a pretty brutal fight. But ultimately, they're definitely taken. I don't know anything much about Black Noir, really. I don't know if any of y'all do. I haven't read the comics yet because I'm really enjoying where the show's taking it, and I don't quite want to mess with what I know is going to happen. It's very rare for me to watch something that was originally a comic and it be on television and have not already read the comic. So I'm kind of enjoying this for what it is right now, but I will definitely be reading Garth Ennis's work on this sometime in the future. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to catch up with Billy, Starlight, and Lamplighter. Stay tuned.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about radicalization prompted by intentional gradual language changes, and also how Annie's having a crisis of faith in everything she's believed in right when Black Noir kidnaps her and her mother. So this episode is largely about family. It's about Grace Mallory's family and Billy's family and Annie's family. A lot of the boys is about found family, but we're learning more about their individual families, who they are outside of each other. And so we're going to pick up with Billy's mom. Billy's mom calls and says that she's in town in New York and tells him that his father's dead. So while Billy told his aunt last time that he had no interest in talking to his parents or seeing them, because his mother's come all the way across the pond to see him and his father is dead, Billy decides to go and meet with her. And when he does, he finds out that his father is actually not dead, but rather his mom has lied to him and that his father is just out on the balcony at the hotel. And when Billy sees him, he threatens to kill him if he takes a step closer to him, but he does grant his father 2 minutes to talk. So his dad tries to reminisce about taking him to a cricket game, but Billy cuts him short and pretty much says, you beat the crap out of us as a kid, or his kids, him and his brother Lenny, and I don't want to hear it. I was happy about the cricket games because that was one of the few times you weren't like beating the crap out of us. So we can see that Billy had a rough childhood, and that helps inform us about how he became the way he became, but also about how important Becca is for his soul and mediating the rougher parts of him. But at the point when Billy's dad says that he didn't have a chance to say goodbye to his son, Lenny, Billy blames his father for that death. But his dad says, Lenny was too soft. And so we learn that Billy's dad beat the crap out of both of them for years, and that eventually Lenny committed suicide. And Billy's dad accuses Billy of being the person who abandoned Lenny. And that's the point where Billy absolutely loses it and almost strangles his father to death. And he seems pretty justified in it, in my opinion. His dad is unapologetic about any of this and is still blaming the victims for everything that's happened. So Billy is absolutely fed up, and he leaves after that point. His mother is tried for reconciliation, and Billy is just not having it. He doesn't care that his dad's dying. And why should he? The guy beat the crap out of him and his brother to the point that his brother killed himself. And you can see that Billy had a soft spot for Lenny, and that Huey is a lot like Lenny, as they've outright said, in many ways. And perhaps that's why Billy bothers to apologize to Huey after he hits him really hard, knocks him to the ground, and tells him that he'll kill him if he ever comes between him and Becca again. But Huey also understands where Billy's coming from in that perspective. And so I think that, in a way, it still makes Billy feel seen. And Huey understands where he's coming from. So even though the physical violence isn't really necessary or okay between friends, in their fictional relationship, this is something that works for them. And it's interesting how they're exploring that dynamic through these other conversations with his dad. So we learn more about Huey by learning a little bit more about what Lenny experienced. And that tells us about why Butcher has such a soft spot for Huey. In the meantime, though, Starlight is waking up in a dark, green-lit box, and she can't get enough energy to really use her powers. So remember, we've seen in previous episodes that she's literally drawing upon the energy from light sources, or from energy sources, like the car that she was drawing from the battery and stuff, in order to cauterize Huey's wounds. And so they're keeping her in an area that doesn't really have enough energy for her to wield her powers. So she can't blast through the door or anything because she can't tap into the energy. It's kind of like depriving Superman of the sun for, I guess, a crazy long time. I don't know how long you'd have to keep Superman down for that, to be honest. But they're not really using kryptonite on her to weaken her, but the green light did look really interesting in that aspect to me. Remember, the reason Superman has powers on Earth, but the people on Krypton didn't really have them, is because on Krypton, I think their sun was red, right? And ours is yellow. And so the yellow sun is the light that's really strengthening Superman and what's allowing him to have these powers, or activating these powers inside of him. So there's some interesting parallels there, and I thought it was interesting that they chose the color green, because when you look at light properties and whether green or red light has more energy, you find that green is kind of right in the middle. It's not even the lowest amount of energy that they could have given to her, right? So UV light is at the lower end of that wavelength spectrum, but the shorter the wavelengths, the more energy that they carry. So violet has a lot of energy in it, right? But then we think about Roy G. Biv and the Green Lantern Corps, the Lantern Corps in general, And you see red on the far end of that. So wouldn't they be putting her in a room with red light, maybe, rather than green if she's just drawing it from the energy? If she was able to draw it from a car, then I would imagine it would be more of the energy component than literally the light. But I'm not quite sure. So I'm going to have to look into that some more to see why they would have maybe selected green for the limited amount of light in there. Is it to draw some type of correlation between her and Superman, or what exactly is going on there? It's not quite making sense with the lantern core or the wavelengths, but maybe she gets her powers from a specific wavelength. Maybe she's limited by the frequency or the wavelengths, and anything above the threshold of blue, perhaps, is going to be too low of a frequency and too long of a wavelength. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe green was a random choice, but I like to think they selected it for a reason. And I can't wait to find out whether that was just artistic in nature, or whether there are some concrete boundaries to her powers based on the light spectrum. Meanwhile, we see that Lamplighter is spending what he believes to be his last few hours watching soup parody porn. He firmly believes that he is going to die at the hearing, that someone from Vought is going to execute him, so he isn't really that interested in doing anything else. And he tells Huey as much. He's like, what else would you have me do right now? I might as well do this. But he also explains his background to Huey while they sit there on this couch, and Huey uncomfortably allows him to watch all of this parody porn. And we find out that Lamplighter lit his house on fire at age 4 and accidentally burnt the whole house down. And that his dad was so proud of him for having done that. And you can see that that has really messed with him as a person. And this whole concept of his life has him feeling like the cuckold in the Homelander parody porno that they are watching. And Huey also reveals a bit of himself to Lamplighter, and that he says he watched his dad stagnate after his mom was gone. And Huey thought that he'd found his purpose in that, though. And he says that that makes him a cuck more than anything in an attempt to cheer up Lamplighter, but Lamplighter actually tells him that he's worse than that. He's a cuck fluffer. So Huey's trying to make him feel better, but Lamplighter is still Lamplighter and is being kind of a douche about that. But Huey can't really take continuing to watch this parody porn with him anymore, so he flips the channel and finds the televised press conference rally that Stormfront and Homelander are holding. And the porn has just gone too far for Huey's taste, so he settles on this. And when they're watching it, they see that Annie has been taken by Vought. And Lamplighter casually says they probably have her in 42D. And we find out that's the tower prison at Vought. So Huey asks him to help him sneak in to save her, and Lamplighter agrees to do that, to no longer be the cuck. It is a true, I guess, pep talk in the style that only the boys can really get away with. They're really nailing their particular style, and things are still unexpected, but also hilarious in the outcomes. They just talk like bros, and I kind of love that about them. It's very funny and different from a lot of other superhero conversations. So, when we talk about Stormfront and Homelander being on television, though, they are essentially a public white power couple now. So, they're up there talking about how America used to be, and using derogatory terms like snowflakes and SJWs. And they're using those to make it seem that people who care about justice are weak or jejune, that they're naive and therefore somewhat stupid in this approach. That their pursuit of liberty and justice for all, and all really meaning all, is foolish and useless. So by talking about it in a derogatory way, and in a derisive way, they don't actually have to come out and say any of those things. It's implied with the connotations in the word choices that they use, and also in their tone. But they also outright say things like, has there ever been anyone in history more persecuted for trying to protect their own? So that's a rallying cry for people who are making an us against them statement. They are creating this dichotomy of, you're either with us or you're against us. You're with us or you're with them. And it's creating further divisiveness, just like conflating foreigners with being supervillains or villains or terrorists in general. Whether that's in the show or in the life that this art is imitating. So they're holding these rallies, and they're using this as a rallying cry for more Compound V and more soups. So Homelander and Stormfront are wanting to make more soups and get more Compound V now that the cat is out of the bag about Compound V creating soups to begin with. So they can stoke those concerns about immigration by continuing to conflate immigrants with super terrorists and using this absolutist language. And then they publicly decry Starlight as being a mole and let the audience know she's been apprehended. So they build up to that reveal so that they can really embody her as being this SJW and turning people against folks who pursue social justice, with Starlight as being their figurehead. And so now they've really riled people up and gotten them to move over to their side of it. So before, Starlight has been a really upstanding member of the Seven for the entire time she's been there. She's been super real with folks, with her talk at Believe Expo, and she tests really well with people. But also, at the end of the day, people are just getting angry. They're hearing what they want to hear from Stormfront and Homelander, and so they are becoming more radicalized, and they're just believing this newcomer, even though these other folks have shown them who they are before. But like Stormfront said before, you don't need all of these people to love you. You only need 5 million people super angry. And now we're really seeing what she meant when she said that Starlight was going to be super useful for her. Starlight is now the symbol of this threat to a certain sect of American people. She is an ally to people who are disenfranchised, and that's not something that white nationalists really want. So this is really 2 birds, 1 stone for Stormfront. She gets to take down Starlight, her primary opposition, and also gets to use her as a well-known symbol of justice to morph her gross, radicalized white nationalist agenda around, and to now have a symbol that people can look at and make this concept less abstract and more concrete. Imprisoning Starlight is showing white nationalists that the world that they desire can be achieved, and that it's theirs for the taking if only they'll reach out. And that's very similar to how Donald Trump has villainized a lot of people over the years, from immigrants to political opponents, and sometimes political opponents who are immigrants. We're going to go on a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Stormfront's philosophy that a common enemy rouses the base. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how Homelander and Stormfront are essentially a white power couple. Kind of like what Donald Trump wishes he could be with Melania, except for the part where Melania seems to also hate him. I don't know if that means she's also a good person. I'm not going that far. But I am saying that the gift sets of her swatting away his hand do bring me a lot of giggles. So, Stormfront and Homelander are trying to do this, or are succeeding in an area where Donald Trump has not been able to. But they're trying to rally the base, and that's really what she's doing by incarcerating Starlight. She has put SJWs and also immigrants in this light of being terrorists or being terrorist sympathizers. And she outright says, a common enemy rouses the base. So, if you think back on American history, we can see that that has happened a lot over the years. Think about everyone's reactions post 9/11 and how America came together as a country to hate people from the Middle East. That doesn't necessarily mean that this is a good thing, but she is right in that a common enemy will rouse the base. And the fact is, she's already radicalized people to do things like shoot the convenience store clerk that we saw at the very beginning of the episode. And we also see that Stormfront is looking kind of nostalgic when she sees a baby, and she starts talking about her daughter a little bit. So Homelander decides to bring Stormfront to meet Becca and Ryan, which is bad news bears. So Becca and Ryan are playing outside with Legos. It's kind of adorable. And Homelander apologizes to Ryan, saying, hey buddy, I went too far last time, and I won't ever do that again. And then he introduces Stormfront as his girlfriend. So this is echoing that PR theme that we've seen a lot, in particular this season, of acknowledgement, apology, and action/redirection. So he's, saying, hey, I went too far last time. I won't do that again. Acknowledgement, apology, and then going, hey, this is my girlfriend. And that is the redirection for it. So he says he'll be around more, and he wants them to be a family. But he doesn't specify who he wants to be a family. And so I'm really starting to feel like Becca's life might be in danger, because Homelander may feel that now that he has Stormfront in his life, he can piece together the perfect family. He's going to patchwork quilt his way into the family that he never had. And this might be the push that Becca really needs to seek Billy's help and to get him to know Ryan so that we can get that plotline to converge. Meanwhile, poor Elena is really upset about the video that she saw of Maeve and Homelander on the flight that went down, and Homelander telling Maeve they had to leave everyone behind because they didn't want bad press from having saved only a few people and letting everyone else die. So dead men tell no tales. And Elena is really upset about it. Maeve is too. You can tell she's distraught in the video. But Elena is still new to this. That wasn't the first terrible thing that Homelander ever made Maeve do. So Maeve has learned gradually how to live with these things. But Elena hasn't. This is the first that she's really finding out that superheroes are depraved and more villainous than they are heroes. So she tells Maeve she's going to go out of town to her sister's for a while to process the realizations of the horrors that Maeve has lived through and the atrocities she's been forced to commit, even if she knows that Maeve didn't really have much choice because she feared for her life. She was coerced into doing those things, just like Starlight was coerced into sexual assault by the Deep at the very beginning. There are some strong themes of coercion in the show, y'all, even in places of power, particularly when wielded against women. And Elena says she just needs some time, but Maeve is really upset and she flips a table, like hardcore Jesus in the temple, flips that table, and Maeve feels like she's being punished for revealing the real her, because Elena's asked to see this part of her all along. And Elena does genuinely apologize. She's as distraught about this as Maeve is, but in a different way. And she almost looks at Maeve with pity in her eyes, like she's hurt that someone she loves has had to go through this and to do these things. And she probably also feels some guilt from being angry at Maeve for so many years for staying closed off. It's very different for her in seeing that it really was for her own protection, and that Maeve wasn't kidding about that at any point. She wasn't even overstating it. If anything, she may have been understating it. This really results in Ashley showing up to Maeve's vault room eventually and finding her in bed with some rando and Elena gone. And Maeve is just gone full hedonistic Maeve. She's just vaping and hanging with this guy and tells her that Elena's gone. And Ashley's really upset about this. She's like, oh no, what about our PR campaign? They don't want a bisexual, they want a lesbian, and all this other stuff. And Maeve is just out of F's to give, y'all. And she tells Ashley to be a human being for once in her life. And we actually do see Ashley soften. And she also seems to genuinely apologize before she leaves. So Maeve's getting a lot of genuine apologies right now, a lot of apologizing going on, but that doesn't necessarily make what she's going through any easier. There is a lot happening in this episode, like most of the episodes this season, and we see a couple of visits to Jonah, the doctor who was responsible for Homelander. So Mallory and MM go together to Jonah to talk about Sage Grove and to try to get him to testify in Congress. But they can't get him to either talk to them or to testify. And Jonah outright tells Mallory that she's the last person who should ask him for that specific favor, seeing as she lost her whole family, and he has a daughter. She ends up agreeing with Jonah, and outside she tells MM that he should also just leave with his family. The family's the most important thing, and that she will even arrange for passage for him and his family to go to Nicaragua and escape all of this, that he should cherish the time that he has with them. MM's kind of stunned, but he's also not willing to take her up on that until after they've achieved their goal. Kimiko has also come back over to the light side after her brief foray into being a mercenary, and she's helping Frenchie watch over the AOC character's house, Victoria Newman's house. And they bond over watching her bake with her daughter, and they talk a little bit about how Frenchie and Kimiko both used to do that with their moms. And Frenchie says that there's a saying he's heard, and that's that you die twice. Once when you stop breathing, and again when someone utters your name for the last time. And he says he'd like to learn how to communicate with Kimiko so she can tell him about her family and say their names to keep them alive in that way. And so she starts teaching him her personal method of sign language. It's super adorable, you guys. I loved it. But we also get to see A-Train gifting the Deep a goldfish. So that's weird, but it's an apology for being mean to him in the past. It's a strange gift, considering the Deep can talk to fish. So it's kind of like he just gave him a friend incarcerated in a little tiny water box, in my opinion. But it is what it is, I suppose. The Deep seems to really like the gift and is excited. He's like, hey, he knows my name! And they seem to put their previous beef behind them. We also see Garam Viznik's character coming by to say he has a meeting with Mr. Edgar the next week. And Garam Viznik's character, as the head of the church, says the Eagle the Archer claims the program failed him, and now he's a toxic figure that no one is allowed to communicate with anymore. And the Deep decides to eschew or shun his old friend. And A-Train, who is very new to the church, starts feeling really uneasy. And it's very similar to a lot of different religious groups, or spiritual groups, that have these rules. You see shunning in groups like the Amish. You also see it in the Church of Scientology, which is mostly what this is meant to mirror, but also in cults that I've come across in my actual life. Shunning is really big in cult circles, whether it's Scientology or Christian, any type. If you are not with the group, you are against the group, and you cannot voice any dissatisfaction with them. And if you see this early enough, you can really recognize that sometimes as it causing an uneasy feeling in the pit of your stomach. And that's what's going on with A-Train. This interaction is the first one that's really seemed off for him, and he is now pretty skeptical. And indeed, his gut's right. It turns out that Eagle the Archer was essentially excommunicated from the church because he refused to denounce, I think it was his family. There was someone that he cared about that he refused to denounce, and so they decided he was a, quote, toxic figure, unquote, and would no longer associate with him. The people in the church are not even able to associate with him privately. That is against all of the rules. They don't want that outsider perspective or a negative perspective influencing them at all. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to wrap up this episode with Ryan's motion capture Lego movies, as well as Billy's own visit to Jonah and the outcome of Lamplighter and Huey breaking into Vought. Stay tuned.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how Maeve is coping with Elena needing some space to work through realizing that her superhero girlfriend has had to commit atrocities over the years. We also have A-Train being skeptical about the church now that they've asked them to shun people, and Kimiko and Frenchie bonding and starting to learn how to communicate more effectively together. Now we're going to pick up with Ryan. So, as we discussed earlier, Stormfront was reminiscing about her granddaughter, I believe is who it was, and how, her granddaughter is supposed to be super old now, and that makes her really sad, and she misses babies. So Homelander wants to share his child with her and takes her to go see Ryan and Becca. And Ryan is super proud to show his motion capture Lego movies to Homelander and Stormfront. And the women seem proud. Both Becca and Stormfront genuinely seem kind of proud of him. But Homelander has to absolutely fake it. And then they find out that, he's in movies too. And Ryan's never heard of this before. He's not seen any of these suit movies. Becca doesn't want him to know about those. But it turns out that Homelander has been in movies including Brightest Day and Darkest Night. So, just like Green Lantern, that one gave me a good guffaw. I won't lie to you. So, we have that going on. There's that little bit of a joke in there. But then Stormfront starts undermining Becca's authority with rules for Ryan's life. And it's very forceful very early on. She's playing her hand really early, and Becca's really uncomfortable with this. So Becca demands to speak to Homelander outside, and they have a very frank discussion. And it seems that Homelander genuinely doesn't want his son to be raised the way that he was, because Homelander knows that he's messed up as a person, and he knows that it will mess Ryan up. He knows how he feels on the inside, and he doesn't want his kid to feel that same way. So Becca agrees that the one thing they have in common is they both want what's best for Ryan, and she begs Homelander to let her keep Ryan there, and he acquiesces to that. While that's going on, Billy is paying his own visit to Jonah. So Mallory and MM were not able to get anything out of Jonah. Not a promise to testify, and not even any real words about Homelander out. But Billy is a bit different than both of them. So he goes in there and starts talking to Jonah about Homelander. And Jonah reveals that when Homelander was 5 to 6 years old, he was a very sweet little boy, and he was very big into the old American concepts of, like Davy Crockett and Roosevelt, and being around and playing in the forest, and the concept of manifest destiny. But that Jonah wanted him to be the strongest man in the world, and so he started molding him at that age. And little Homelander didn't even want to be the strongest man in the world. Jonah did that for himself, for his own scientific creation. He created this monster. And so Billy threatens to kill Jonah's entire family for what he's responsible for doing to Billy and Becca, unless Jonah helps him. And this hardline approach in Jonah's softened old age makes him a lot more pliable. Instead of exploiting that weakness for his daughter, Mallory and MM sympathized with it and left. But Billy doesn't really have family to protect right now. He's not able to get to his family necessarily. So Billy's got a little bit less to lose, and he plays hardball. So in this conversation, though, I think one of the most important points is that Billy seems to realize that Jonah is the one who is fully responsible for Homelander. He is ultimately the person who is responsible for Homelander. And much like Billy's own relationship with his abusive, toxic father, this father figure molded Homelander into who he is today. And that just brings us back around to my assertion that we've discussed in the past, that ultimately Billy and Homelander aren't super different. They're both pretty much lone wolves. They had very difficult childhoods and have lived through some things that other people should never have to. No one should ever have to. But it shaped them into the people that they are today. And hearing that little 5 to 6 year old Homelander was sweet and didn't even want to be the person that they made him into gives Billy some perspective. Don't get me wrong, I'm fairly confident that he still hates Homelander with every bone in his body. For him, the reason for it doesn't necessarily give an excuse or anything for why Homelander is the way he is, but it does give him some perspective, and it helps Billy to redirect some of his anger, at least temporarily, to achieve his goals. At the same time, Lamplighter and Huey are breaking into Vought, and Lamplighter's prints are still on file, somehow. So I suppose they just haven't recognized in the chaos of Sage Grove that they need to revoke them. I guess Stormfront hasn't picked up on it yet or anything. So he's still in the system, and he's able to break into Vought. So when that happens, Lamplighter takes Huey into the conference room rather than Starlight's cell. And Huey's been there in Vought before a couple times, and so he's like, hey, I don't know where the cell is, but this is definitely the conference room, what's up? And Lamplighter's like all monotone, sad, because they replaced his statue with one of Starlight. And Lamplighter strangely says that he'd hoped to do this in front of his statue. That's all he had wanted. And then he self-immolates. Yeah, he sets himself on fire. So that's probably why they showed us the guy vomiting acid and then getting it on himself earlier, so that we can see that they can sometimes harm themselves with their own powers. And Lamplighter does that right now to set himself on fire and kill himself. And Huey can't do anything other than stand there and just watch. In horror, Huey just stays there and watches Lamplighter burn until the sprinklers put him out. And then he brutally chops Lamplighter's hand off of his body so that he can use his prints to get back out of Vought. So he's spent enough time with Billy that he's picked up how to commit this carnage and how to think forward in these ways. He's failing forward and is still going to try to find 42D, that prison tower in there. He's made it this far. He's been in that secret tunnel system with Lamplighter, so maybe he can figure it out. I was a little concerned that Lamplighter's prints might have been burned off. I don't know how hot Lamplighter's fire burns, but, he's dead. So, we'll find out when Huey tries to use it on the wall. But while he's doing this, the princess breaks herself out of the detention center. Yes, I am talking about Star Wars. But Starlight herself breaks out of the detention center herself, using the power from all the sprinkler alarms going off to blow the door, only to be confronted and tackled through a concrete wall by Black Noir. So, just as he is strangling her to death, Maeve sneaks up behind him, tears his mask up, and force feeds him an almond joy, because he has a tree nut allergy, and then kicks his EpiPen away from him. That made me laugh really hard, because it looked really ridiculous to Starlight to see Maeve just come up behind him and smash an almond joy in his mouth. She's like, what are you doing? And she's like, he has a tree nut allergy, so I'm gonna kill him. And so that's his vulnerability. Different people have different vulnerabilities, I suppose, and that one is Black Noir's. It hadn't occurred to me that superheroes might still have allergies, but interestingly enough, they do, at least in the case of Black Noir. We don't know much about him, but we do know he has a tree nut allergy. And it was pretty hilarious the way that Maeve just kicked his EpiPen away from him in order to really take him down, considering how awesome he is at fighting. So Starlight then tries to get Maeve to come with her, but Maeve declines. She's not quite ready to do that. And Huey is able to use Lamplighter's severed hand to find where he thought Annie would be, only to find her mom there instead. But they're reunited with Annie in the hallways and have a weirdly long moment talking before they realize they need to really go. I don't understand why they spent so long talking, considering all the fire alarms and stuff going on. So, people are on high alert. And sure, chaos can be a good distraction, but only for so long. And once they find that Black Noir is on the ground incapacitated, they're gonna know something's really wrong and probably start checking for a jailbreak. We also see a lot of the branding in this episode. It's pretty funny. They have the constant fizzy waters being shown. And they also have Becca pulling a Queen Maeve, Brave Maeve lasagna dinner out of the oven. And that's part of her new LGBT plotline that Ashley and them are putting forth in the media. And so it really shows us that they are not above exploiting or marketing absolutely anything. And really, again, it's art imitating life. I don't know if you guys have seen all the McDonald's specials lately from different folks who sing, and I don't even know what all a lot of them do. I don't recognize all the names on the board. I'm not that hip. I'm sorry, guys. But they have had like the J Balvin burger combo kind of thing and things like that. They started putting a lot of skins like that on Fortnite and everything for these people and putting their dances up and stuff. So they will market and monetize in any way possible. And we're seeing that with this Brave Maeve lasagna too. So when Becca goes to pull this out of the oven and call Ryan for dinner, he doesn't come. And so she finds him outside with Homelander and Stormfront. And it turns out that they've flown him up and shown him the surrounding area he lives in that compound, and told him that Becca had lied to him. And now Ryan hates her, and he leaves with Stormfront and Homelander. They take off up into the air flying. There's nothing Becca can do. And Becca has said, he needs his mother, and Stormfront assures her as they're about to fly off that he'll have a mother. So it turns out that Homelander didn't really acquiesce, he just manipulated her. And now Becca's trapped in that compound, and she can't get out to save her son. We get to see another brief reconciliation between Billy and his mother in the same coffee shop that Annie and her mom were in earlier for their reconciliation. And you see that his mom misses him, and that Billy seems to genuinely love his mom, but he's like, look, you decided to stay with him, and that's on you. So I don't want any part of that. I don't want to see him. I don't want to talk about him or any of that. But I love you, essentially, is how the conversation goes. Not quite that open, but, he does outright call his dad the C word. And his mom says it right back to him that, yeah, his dad is one. And I enjoyed that scene, too. It's very raw and honest and very true to life for some adult conversations about child abuse and domestic violence that I have been party to in the past. It felt very authentic to me. So this episode's really all about family, about Homelander growing up and Billy growing up, and how Eagle the Archer is getting excommunicated because he won't denounce his family, and how the church itself is supposed to be their new family. And now we also have Starlight and her mom working on their stuff, Becca and Ryan being ripped apart as a family so that Homelander and Stormfront can create this new creepy weird patchwork family by turning Ryan against Becca and then taking advantage of his anger to go ahead and fly off with him, knowing there's nothing that Becca can do. We learn about Huey's family, and Lamplighter's family, and Grace Mallory's family, and Jonah's family, and also Victoria Newman's family with her daughter, and through her, Frenchie and Kimiko's relationships with their mom, and cooking with them. So, ultimately, that's really what this episode is all about. What constitutes a family, how they come together, and how they fall apart. And whether or not reconciliation is possible for these characters in different domains. Elena and Maeve, I think, will be able to come back together later, but Elena just needs a little bit of time. They are, in their own way, a family, though, just as Starlight has her family with her mom and with the boys, but she also has somewhat of a sisterhood with Maeve, and I'm really enjoying seeing the development of that. Maeve still helps her, but Maeve does it on her terms. She's just standing there going, this is what I can offer you. I'll kill Black Noir for you, or at least incapacitate him, but I'm not leaving to come and join your cause right now. I'm not a joiner. So by the end of the episode, we've explored family extensively. Lamplighter can no longer testify because he has literally set himself on fire and died in the Vought conference room. Starlight is completely off the grid now with the boys, and that congressional hearing is underway. So the AOC character, Victoria Newman, puts forward corporate malfeasance and multiple felony charges against Vought, and we feel that we found our new person to replace Lamplighter for testifying in the form of Jonah. So Billy's approach worked best here, and they call former CSO Dr. Jonah Vogelbaum to the stand to testify in this hearing. And just as Jonah rolls in his wheelchair, heads start exploding. And it's real Red Wedding meets V-Wars type carnage. It is hardcore, and heads are exploding everywhere as Mallory tries to help Victoria Newman get out of there before any harm can come to her, because she is the one senator or congresswoman who is on their side. So everything in true The Boys fashion goes off of the rails in a truly spectacular fashion. It is a sight to behold, y'all. I hope you've already caught up with it, and we will catch up with the ending of it next week when we talk about The Boys Season 2, Episode 8, when all the crap hits the fan. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.